Hello and welcome to this edition of Wineskins, a program that features reflections on the lives of the saints and sacred scriptures, along with information on topics and issues from a Catholic perspective. I'm Father Jim Korda. Wineskins is brought to you by the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, a division of the Society of St. Paul. On our show today, I will interview Bishop Abraham Allende on the Lutheran Catholic Covenant. We will also look at the life of St. Francis of Assisi, as well as reflections on the readings for this 26th Sunday in Ordinary Time. That and more coming up on Wineskins. In our current issue segment, Dave Schmidt will tell us more about marriage and family life in the Diocese of Youngstown.
Today is October 1st, Respect Life Sunday. It is also the beginning of Respect Life Month, a time that the Church sets aside to reflect on the gift of human life from conception until natural death. Often when the Church expresses its teaching regarding human life, many people concentrate on what the Church is against. The Church is against abortion. The Church is against artificial contraception. It's against in vitro fertilization. The Church is against embryonic stem cell research. It's against physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. The Church is against the death penalty. When expressed in this way, one can get the impression that the Church's teaching is all about rules for the sake of rules. But what we don't want to miss is that behind the Church's no to things that destroy or compromise human life is the Church's resounding yes to the gift of human life. Let's take abortion, for instance. When a woman faces a crisis pregnancy, many in our society focus on her choice of whether or not she wants the child, and how bearing the child will impact her life in so many ways: physically, psychologically, economically, socially, emotionally. But in contrast to this, Pope Benedict XVI reminds us of our capacity for love, even in difficult situations. He says, "The Church knows that with the help of grace, human freedom is capable of the definitive and faithful gift of self. She knows that even in the most difficult circumstances, human freedom is capable of extraordinary acts of sacrifice and solidarity to welcome the life of a new human being." Thus, one can see that the no which the Church pronounces in her moral directives, on which public opinion sometimes unilaterally focuses, is in fact a great yes to the dignity of the human person, to human life, and to the person's capacity to love. It is an expression of the constant trust with which, despite their frailty, people are able to respond to the loftiest vocation for which they are created, the vocation to love. With these words, Pope Benedict XVI is echoing a profound truth identified by the Church's Second Vatican Council in its Pastoral Constitution of the Church in the Modern World, where the Church teaches that we cannot fully find ourselves except through a sincere gift of ourselves. This notion that we, human beings, most find or realize ourselves when we make a sincere gift of ourselves should not come as a surprise to us who claim to be Christian. After all, that is what Jesus models for us. In today's second reading at Mass, St. Paul urges us to have the same attitude of Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming in human likeness. In other words, just as Jesus made a sincere gift of himself to us, even to the point of dying on the cross, we are to make ourselves sincere gifts to one another, to our spouses, to our children, to an elderly parent or relative, to anyone in need of our care. While reflecting on this, I'm reminded of a woman that my wife and I knew many years ago. As a young woman, she lived a rather self-indulgent lifestyle, which included much partying. Some might describe her as being wild, literally dancing on the tables at times. She became pregnant through a sexual encounter with a man whom she had no intention of marrying. Although having a child was certainly going to impact her life, her career, and her future relationships, she chose life for her daughter. A few years later, while reflecting on this experience, she credited the birth of her daughter with saving her life and helping her find new meaning and purpose in life. To echo the words of Pope Benedict XVI, despite her frailty, she was able to respond to the loftiest vocation for which she was created, the vocation to love. Thus, she found herself by making a sincere gift of herself to her baby. For Wineskins, this is Dave Schmidt.
This coming Wednesday, the Church celebrates the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. To tell us more is Brother Aloysius Milella. He is from the Society of St. Paul in Canfield.
St. Francis of Assisi died on October the 3rd, 1226, and was canonized 2 years later by Pope Gregory IX. In 1939, he was named patron of Italy, together with St. Catherine of Siena. He is unique among the saints, not only because he received the stigmata, but especially because of his likeness to Christ in lifestyle and apostolate. Born at Assisi, the son of a wealthy wood dyer, Francis spent a somewhat turbulent and adventurous youth, taking part in the war between Assisi and Perugia. After a mysterious dream, he returned to Assisi where, in the church of St. Damian, he heard 3 times the invitation from the crucifix to repair the church, which was falling into ruins. As a result, at the age of 25, Francis renounced his patrimony, and in the presence of the bishop and the citizenry, he stripped himself of all his possessions and consecrated himself to God. In the first phase of his life, he donned the garb of a penitent and led a rather secluded life. Finally, after hearing the passage from the Gospel that describes the mission of the apostles, Francis realized that his vocation was that of an itinerant preacher. He gathered together a small group with the intention of following the teaching of the Gospel as literally as possible. This would be the beginning of the Order of Friars Minor, and the first rule was approved orally by Pope Innocent III in 1209. In the second period of his ministry, Francis and his companions preached the gospel to people of every condition. Desirous of martyrdom, Francis even went to Morocco, Egypt, and finally to Palestine. 5 Franciscan friars were martyred in Morocco by the Muslims. In 1212, Francis founded the cloistered Franciscan nuns with the assistance of Clare of Assisi. In 1220, he began work on a second rule of the desire of some of the friars to relax the rigors of strict poverty. In 1223, Francis, who was a deacon, celebrated Christmas by presenting in tableau form a living crib, and he himself sang the gospel. In the last phase of his life and ministry, almost blind and suffering from various physical afflictions, Francis received the stigmata. Wounded with love, he composed the famous Canticle to the Sun. He died at the age of 45. The prayers of the Mass are taken from the Franciscan Missal, and they depict the spiritual traits of St. Francis of Assisi, beginning with the entrance antiphon, Francis, a man of God, left his home and gave away his wealth to become poor and in need, but the Lord cared for him. The opening prayer of the Mass states that God helped St. Francis reflect the image of Christ through a life of poverty and humility. We ask that we may walk in the footsteps of St. Francis and imitate his joyful love. The apostolic zeal of St. Francis of Assisi should stimulate us to re-evangelize the Christians of our day. Moreover, his insistence on poverty should prompt modern Christians to place less emphasis on wealth and to live more simply. The antiphon for the Canticle of Zechariah states, "Francis left this earth a poor and lowly man. He enters heaven rich in God's favor, greeted with songs of rejoicing." For Wineskins, I am Brother Aloysius Milella.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Korda. Today we're going to talk about the Lutheran Catholic Covenant. And joining me in today's show is Bishop Abraham Allende. Welcome back to our show.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me again.
It's always wonderful to have you on and to learn more about the wonderful relationship that we have together and to celebrate that and commemorate that, especially in the anniversary year. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but if you could just give the folks a little background again into the covenant and how it began, how it started, and some of the significance behind it.
Back in 1999, the Lutheran World Federation and the Vatican signed the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, which of course clarified that we are all saved by grace through faith and not by works. And I think we reached that agreement. At that time, Bishop Marcus Miller, who was the Bishop of the Northeastern Ohio Synod, and Bishop Tobin, who was Bishop then of the Youngstown Diocese, decided to do something more on a local level. And it was, I believe, at Bishop Tobin's suggestion that we sign a covenant that would unite us in a certain way. And we had three parts to that covenant. One was to pray together, to study together, and then to engage in social action, social justice projects together. And so now that covenant is in its 18th year. And every other year we have celebrated that. One year it would be in a Catholic parish, the other year it'd be in a Lutheran setting. And so it's been a great way to foster our relationship, continue to work on a more local level towards that unity which we also desire.
Bishop, are you aware of other dioceses around the country that might have engaged in these covenant ceremonies or engage in these dialogues between Lutherans and Catholics?
There are quite a few. I don't know, I can't rattle any off by name, but I know that since our synod overlaps two dioceses, we have the same kind of relationship with the Diocese of Cleveland.
Okay.
But I know that other synods and other dioceses do work together and do things together, but I don't know as far as how formal that agreement is or that covenant is.
Let's talk about those three areas that you had mentioned, prayer, study, and some social outreach. What is basically the prayer experience that folks can anticipate if they participate in any of the covenant ceremonies?
I think that prayer for each other, prayer that we remain in communion with God, because I think that's most important for all of us. And I think that we pray that either of our two denominations continue to become closer together and that we too also work to learn more about each other and just basically pray for the benefit of us, that God continues to bless us and continues to nurture us and strengthen us in the faith.
And then that element of study and education, I at least find it very important for myself whenever I'm in dialogue with somebody to learn more about them. That helps me understand, I think, myself a little better too. Is that your experience?
Yes, very much so. I think that one of the things that over the course of these covenant celebrations, one of the things that we do in the covenant celebrations is we bring in a speaker, two speakers actually, one from the Roman Catholic perspective and one from the Lutheran perspective, and we look at one topic, for example, how Lutherans read the Bible as opposed to how Catholics read the Bible. Lutheran interpretation of the Eucharist and the Catholic interpretation of the Eucharist, so that we can learn more about how the other thinks. And one of the things that we discover is that we have so many similarities, and we are much more united than people realize. So it's good. A learning experience lets us know that we are not that different.
The other area is the social outreach, and I've discovered that most interfaith dialogues or ecumenical dialogues find their commonality in their concern for people. And if we're about concerning ourselves with people and their needs, then for some reason that really binds us together. And so what are some of the outreach opportunities that Lutherans and Catholics engage in to celebrate their unity?
Well, there are many needs out there: hunger, poverty, racism, and all these things we can work to try to change people's hearts. Helping our neighbor in need is very important. I can give you one concrete example that I was involved in when I was still in the parish. I was developing a Latino mission in the Canton area, and I worked very closely with the Immigrant Worker Project, and we did a lot of things. Our congregation, La Trinidad, worked very closely with St. Anthony's in Canton, and we did a lot of help with the Latino immigrants that were in the Canton area who needed help in many ways. You know, first of all, navigating the healthcare system, navigating the legal system, and all those issues. And so we were there. We were a ministry of presence. We accompanied them in those areas. And of course, we've also taken part in marches for justice and so forth. So that's one area that we can be a visible witness to the world, that we care about the person in need and the stranger.
Let's talk just briefly about the importance of dialogue, why dialogue and communication is so vital when we talk about ecumenism and interfaith activities.
Well, dialogue increases understanding, it reduces anxiety. It just helps us to get to know each other better and to grow in relationship. We strengthen relationships through dialogue. As long as there's conversation, there's always a path forward. Whereas if conversation stops, then the relationship ends. It's kind of like a tree. You know, if you don't water a tree and nurture it, it doesn't grow. So conversation and dialogue and communication is that water which nourishes that plant and causes it to grow.
We know that 2018 is a significant year celebrating the Reformation. And so we're going to talk in a moment about that. And I'm going to ask you, when we come back from the break, to give us a little background into Martin Luther and the whole celebration that we're about to embark on. For more information on that current issue and to listen to Wineskins, visit the website of the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown at www.doi.org. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I told her I love her.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I bought her an orchid.
What have I done for my marriage today? I sent my husband a love email.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. But she's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Make a change for the better. Need help? Go to foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
By the time we can walk, each of us yearns for the joy that comes from being able to do for ourselves. Church World Service believes that being self-reliant is a joy everyone should share. So around the block or around the world, share the joy. Church World Service.
The song we have for you today is from the CD called To You We Give All Praise. It is by Father Joe Higginbotham, courtesy of Saints Francis and Clare Press.
Most High, Almighty Father, we honor you today, for you alone are worthy. To you we give all praise. We praise you for creation, for creatures great and small. The sun in all its splendor, he rises which you said, all fruits and grain that feeds us from fields which we attend, and bless those who give pardon for your all gracious love. The humble in their sufferings are crowned by God above. Praise be our gentle Savior and Sister Holy Death, from whom there's no escaping, who takes our final breath. Woe those whose sin is mortal, God's grace they do disdain. Thus never will they see God, they merit lasting pain. Bless those who seek to serve you and do your holy will, for they will share your glory with every hunger filled.
And to tell us about the scriptures for this 26th Sunday in Ordinary Time is Deacon Ed Laubacher. He is from St. Paul Church in North Canton.
While growing up, my parents always had a very large garden, and it was understood that we were all expected to work at least 1 hour each weekend in that garden. I don't ever remember being asked to go work. It was more or less known that if you intended to eat, you were expected to weed and hoe and pick and even snap beans endlessly, or so it seemed to me as a young boy. What I most vividly remember is accidentally pulling out a bean plant or cutting them down with a hoe and trying to hide the evidence. I knew I would get scolded by my father, and I did not want that, nor did I want to disappoint him. Still, if he had ever simply asked me to work, I probably would never have responded yes as a child. I really disliked the vegetables anyway. As I got older, I certainly would have helped, at least most of the time, because I was learning right from wrong. I had learned that some responsibility was expected. I had learned that my parents were right. Today we are privileged to read another one of Jesus' amazing parables. On the surface, this parable seems as though it is simply about tax collectors, prostitutes, and other sinners being judged as more worthy than the priests to enter God's kingdom. Of course, this would have been an incredible slap in the face to the priests. In their eyes, these people were terrible sinners and therefore considered unrighteous, having no chance to enter God's kingdom. In addition, they would have been extremely insulted and certainly would not rate Jesus very high on their friend list. But there is so much more to this story that we can learn. First, a man had 2 sons. Both were his children. Both were much beloved and so dear to his heart. This man wanted both to obey. He wanted both to work in the vineyard, both to labor and help bring forth a harvest, both to help increase the yield, to make the vineyard as fruitful as possible. This father wanted all of his sons to obey and enter into his kingdom. He wanted no one left out. He also wanted both to experience his mercy, to know his great love. The first son responded no to God at first. He denied his father. He refused to obey, refused to enter the vineyard. This son wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to live by his own rules. He thought he knew what was good for him. But later, he reconsidered. He reconciled with his father's intentions. He turned away from his own selfishness and did what he knew was the right thing to do. He had a complete change of heart and saw the error in his original intention and did what pleased his father. On the other hand, the other son vowed that he would labor in the vineyard and tend the crop, but never lifted a finger, never helped increase the yield at all. This son acted as though he would be loyal, as though he would stick with his father and further the production of the farm. Whether he lied to his father originally or later just simply decided not to obey him is not clear. But either way, this son showed that he was not loyal. He showed that he thought he had a better plan, that he could decide on his own what was correct. The son also did not see his need for mercy or forgiveness. He did not see that he really needed a Savior. He was blind to his own imperfections. Both the Gospel and the first reading are reminding all of us that we need to examine our lives frequently, every day or every evening before we go to sleep. We need to look for instances where we said no to God, events in which we turned from righteousness and embraced our own selfishness. God is calling us to reconciliation today, but not just today. He is calling us to turn back to Him all the time. Life is so much easier when we say yes to God at His first invitation. What is God inviting you to do now? I would give anything to spend an hour in a garden with my dad right now, and I would definitely tell him about the bean plants I accidentally ruined, and I know he would forgive me. For Wineskins, this is Deacon Ed Laubacher.
St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, uses an early Christian hymn to call the faithful to obedience in God. Through his own self-emptying, Jesus was obedient to the Father. What is God asking of us? Are we always willing to empty ourselves in His service? Wineskins is made possible through the annual Bishop's Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. The program is produced by CTNY, the Catholic Telecommunications Network of Youngstown. I'm Father Jim Korda, saying thank you for being with us. Have a blessed week, and remember to pray for the dignity and sanctity of all human life, born and unborn.